pull up a hay bale and take a seat. It's time for Architecture, Coffee, and Ink as we dive into our first ever conversation episode. Hello, this is Hollywood C, and you're listening to Architecture, Coffee, and Ink, a podcast dedicated to introducing the concepts, detailing out the designs, and tackling the architecture you might not realize the meaning behind. I'm your hostess, and I am here today to start introducing you to the concepts that make you wonder why. So I ask you to brew your coffee, grab your sketchbook and pen, and let's begin. So welcome to the second ever episode of Architecture, Coffee, and Ink, where I am really excited to announce that I am here today with one of my best friends, Racheal L. So just to introduce Racheal, she has a bachelor's in animal and dairy sciences from 2016. And then she went on to graduate in 2019 with an MS in agriculture and animal sciences, where she focused her research topic on the effects of maternal nutrition and genetic background on myogenic, adiapogenic, and fibrogenic miRNA expression in skeletal muscles of Angus and Brahman cattle offspring. Thank you, Racheal, for coming to join us today.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. Get to be your first guest.
You do. Thank you so much for joining me, because I needed somebody who would forgive me for basically making her record 3 times now, as we struggle through trying to do this. So as everybody can probably guess, we're probably going to talk about cows today, from your research topic and special presentation. So Racheal has been a great friend of mine. She's stuck with me through 10 years now, unfortunately for her. And we have gone through some crazy shenanigans, so she would be the perfect guest to help me kind of discuss the difference between, like, basically a podcast episode focused on agriculture. Because when I was talking with a professor this week, unrelated to anything, I was just kind of outlining my thesis and what I was doing and why I thought I was cool enough to start a podcast. And the professor was like, well, if you're going to do a podcast about landscape and architecture, you better talk about the agriculture industry, because what greater influence of architecture meets landscape is there than farms and the rural settings and everything like that. And we're going to go into a little bit more depth, because that sounded pretty naive, laissez-faire attempt at it. But so Racheal, before we get started in the topic, the huge in-the-depth start, what is your background and experience with agriculture, i.e. farms, in both your professional and private life?
All right. So I'll just give you I guess, a little rundown about me. I didn't grow up on a farm, but I guess everyone else doesn't. I kind of grew up in the suburbs, or I guess outside the suburbs. But my father was a biologist and an entomologist. My mother worked for the USDA, so I wasn't very far removed. My mother grew up on a farm. Her parents ran, during my lifetime anyway, a cow-calf operation, so beef cows, in Kentucky. And we weren't very close to the farm, but anytime we went to visit, I got to help feed the cows or name an orphan baby or help feed, bottle feed babies. I worked through college during the summers on the farm. And that's where I don't know, I guess learned my love for agriculture there. And obviously you said I worked through both of my degrees and are in agriculture. And then when I got out of grad school, I have been working as a reproductive technician with dairy cows, which pretty much means I make a living breeding cows through artificial insemination. Super fancy. I go every day and I make babies. It's lots of fun. And
Right.
also, I should probably take this opportunity to warn everybody, if you hear some weird noises, I have 2 dogs running around the house right now. And one of he should get attention right now.
That's
Sorry
okay.
about that.
We are definitely dropping. Her babies are Allie and Taz, and both of their photos will 100% be on the blog post, so everybody else can enjoy them as well as much as I do. So with the farms, you've actually worked on everything from small private farms to large commercial farms. And from that wide scale, many of them have been attempting to produce product for sale. So how does this influence the setup of the building?
Well, so that question, I guess, has a lot of answers. And it starts with what kind of farm you're looking at. So the infrastructure you need for a beef farm is usually pretty different from what you would need a dairy. And so do you mind if I start with my grandparents' farm, maybe?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So they ran 50 cows and calves. Before my time, that farm was also used to raise tobacco, a little bit of corn, some soybeans. And so what we ended up with was a big tool shed with a couple parking spots in it, a cow shed that had some trough space to feed the cows, and a hay manger. And eventually my papa added on and a little room for calves to eat with like a gate just big enough for them to fit through. We have another barn that also has more troughs in it, and a working chute with a head catch that we used for loading them onto the trailer, moving them, sorting, or doctoring. A tobacco barn from when we raised tobacco. It also acts as a tool storage barn for implements and equipment. And the newest addition is a hay barn so that we can keep all the hay stored under a roof. And every time I turn around, it seems like we're adding on to that a little bit more every year. But that's just to make the point that the infrastructure is ever changing. That farm has been there within our family for at least 40 years, and we're always adding something to make it better and make it work for us. So more about the farms I encountered while I'm working tend to be more dairy farms. I come across everything from a small family homestead with maybe one milking cow. So she might have a single stall like you would have for a horse with access to a small paddock. And then you have the next step up would be of a family dairy, usually a traditional tie stall barn with usually somewhere between 50 and 100 cows that are milking at a time. And so those barns, you generally find a silo, maybe 2 or 3, for grain and silage storage. And quite a number of those farmers let their cows out during the day in the summertime, and even sometimes at night. So the barn has to be connected to pasture, and the pasture needs to be close by so the cows can come, you're not spending 2 hours getting cows in and up out of pasture every day. They have to plan for their manure storage, how to get that in and out of the barn. It has to be efficient. Their hay storage and equipment storage, I guess, to that effect. In barns of that size, sometimes we call, I've heard them called bunk barns or bank barns. They can be built into essentially a bank or a hillside. So the cows would be on the bottom in what looks to me a lot of times like a walkout basement. And then the floor above that would typically be used for hay storage or equipment storage. And the rafters on those barns a lot of times will be used for hanging tobacco. So it's a multi-purpose building, but it has this fairly small footprint. So I feel like that's very efficient.
So vertical farming instead of horizontal farming, basically.
Right. They're pretty neat. Everybody makes use of them, in the best way for their farm and what they raise. In the area I work in currently, these tend to be generational farms, and so sometimes the barns have been added on to. If you go around and you ask most of my farmers, they're milking more cows than their father was or their grandfather was. So sometimes you can look at a barn from a road and be like, oh, that's been added on to 2 or 3 times because they needed more space for cows or calves or equipment storage. And most of them are lucky enough that somebody planned for that and left enough room around it to expand a little bit. And I guess the third kind of farm I usually, or maybe it's my fourth, I haven't been keeping track of my own list here. Some of your bigger freestall barns. And so these farms are anywhere from that are milking, and really important how you lay out the pens and where you place the buildings in relation to the parlor. For the cow barns, you want it to be efficient, an efficient way to move the cows from their pen to the parlor and then back to their pen without impeding your progress, so that you can get everyone milked as quickly as possible. But also, most dairy farmers raise their calves from when they're little bitty to when they're heifers, and then when they enter the milking herd. So you have to think about placement of these, for lack of a better word, stations. So that as they grow, you're not having to ship them all the way across the farm. You can just take them slowly to the next step, hopefully just by opening a couple of gates to move them to the next barn or pen or however that farm is set up. So hopefully that's a good introduction to kind of what I'm looking at here.
Yeah, it does. And it kind of brings up, I guess, my next question. So you're talking about, you've already kind of covered this, I guess, talking about like having to get the cows through their life and laying out the farm according to like each station, as you were calling it, which reminds me a lot of those little grade school science fairs where you like stop. I don't know if this is an international thing as well as just an American thing, but we used to do like little science fairs in like the first grade elementary school, which is like about your like 5 to 12-year-old kids, and they used to like stop at each station, and each little area was like a different project. I'm kind of imagining the cows kind of going through this right now. But would the product being produced per farm change the layout? So if you were focused more on your fresh produce, and I think in one of the other recordings, we spent a really long time talking about this, about like, that each farm has to produce so much of their own due to like sustainability, their own like crops, their own like feed and things like that. Did you want to like touch on that real quick?
Right. Well, of course, the kind of farm I'm most familiar with cattle of beef or dairy origins, but your farm layout could change drastically if you were a row crop farmer, farming cotton, corn, soybeans. There's a whole list. I could never name them all. But then they would need a lot of storage and sheds for their combines and things. But then if I move kind of back towards beef farmers, most of them grow their own hay. Quite a number of them will grow some of their own grain to reduce their own feed bills, to get their cows through the winter, or some of them supplement year round. A lot of your dairy farmers do the same thing. They grow corn and soybeans, make their own silage from the corn, and hay or green chop to feed their cows year round, because nobody wants to buy all that in. It gets very expensive very quickly, and suddenly your profit margins on that farm are next to nothing to begin with. They'd be non-existent if you had to buy all the feed in.
Okay, so when we're taught in design school to view this, we're really kind of taught, okay, if you research it, this animal needs X by X amount of area, regardless of if you're doing metric system or American system or whatever you're doing.
Right.
And then it needs X amount of food and everything like that. Would you say that that's roughly what farmers are doing as well? We're just kind of framing it in a different template, so to speak?
Right. You have to know how many animals you need to support, and then how much land you need to farm, to feed them year round. So yeah, and I'd say there's a formula out there. It depends on what kind of ration they're feeding, but there's a science behind it.
You heard it here first, folks. Listen to your teachers. They know what they're talking about, design students.
That's right.
But is there a certain distance you've noticed from city life or to suburbs and city life that you feel like really works or doesn't work? I felt like this was a really good topic for us the other day, and something that we often come to and argue about. So once I was in school with Racheal, and she needed to go check a cow for her class that she did get an A on, so I'm very glad we went. But I went out with her to the farm in 5-inch heels, because I did not realize at first until we were in the car that that's where we were going. And we went traipsing through the field looking for baby cows after birth.
Hey, you had fun.
I did have fun.
Yeah, that's right.
But it does make me wonder, is there a certain distance to city life or to the suburbs and the suburban areas that works best that you've noticed?
Oh, that's a hard one, and it depends a lot on the people, I suppose. You may not hear about it every day, but you hear it fairly often that you'll find a farmer that doesn't sell out. The city kind of grows up around his farm. It happens. I personal preference would prefer my farm to be a little bit outside the suburbs, because it makes it safer for me as a producer to move from location to location. Traffic, so there's fewer chances of accidents, or heaven forbid my animals get out and I have to chase them. I'm not chasing them down the interstate. As far as neighbors, I'm sure neighbors to some of these farms would prefer to at least be upwind from them. But having farms close to suburbs, or the city, it definitely gives people that wouldn't normally interact with them, wouldn't normally be on a farm, a chance to at least see them, see that they're there, see where the animals are. even if it's just driving by, like, oh, look, the cows are on the pasture again. Oh, they look happy. Whether people realize it or not, that's a good interaction they can have with agriculture that can have a lasting effect.
Yeah, I think you definitely know about this. That I used to volunteer at a zoo and used to volunteer at a farm before that. I did actually, I know I sounded like I'd never been on a farm, going to a farm in my 5-inch heels. That was just a bad day, I guess. But the thing that I always took away from it was just kind of this general enjoyment. And this is probably not going to be true internationally, where you have communities that are a lot closer. You kind of have a little bit more of a divide in the urban environment to the rural. Like there's a slightly larger gradient. It's not really like up close, where even in America, like the East Coast is slightly more jam-packed full of people. The middle, slowly, there's not as many people. And then you have, again, another like concentrated development on the other side of the east, the Rocky Mountains. I don't know why I was going to say the East Appalachian. That is totally wrong side of the country. I do know my geography, I swear. But, and part of that has to do with the Dust Bowl of American history, when we kind of overproduced in the middle. The Depression happened, the Dust Bowl, which was like literal dust moving up, and then the destruction of multiple farms and things. But all of that to say, when I was volunteering, one of the things that like I felt impacted me the most was this idea of people who had never seen a cow before in their like entire life. They had never interacted with it. It was something only on TV, only on like movies, you know, something that they saw in their Westerns, and that was about it. And it was amazing to watch them get to like meet a cow for the first time, like, and not in a contradictory way, like genuinely, like, I mean, it was so amazing for me. I swear I cried a couple times. It's like the like pure joy on their face of like meeting the animal and getting to like, you know, understand the process of food to table. I mean, I think that was a wasn't that a like promotion for a while there, like food to table, something like that, dine local?
They're still pretty popular. Yeah,
I haven't seen it online as much, or maybe I just stopped watching TV when I joined grad school. I don't know which the truth is.
I did. That's great. Well, I think that's one of my favorite things, is getting to introduce people to agriculture and animals. When I was in school, we did a lot of extension events that were similar. We would have school kids come out and meet the cows. But I think I was telling you about my friend Emily the other day. Now, Emily grew up in Chicago, and she moved, I don't know, maybe in like middle school, out to the middle of nowhere where I grew up. And she had never met a cow, had never met a horse. And the whole concept of that had just blown my mind. There's never been a day where I didn't know where my milk came from, or, you know, the cows on my grandparents' farm, like they had names. And so it just blew my mind, and I took great pride, and I call it introducing her to agriculture. She would probably tell me that I was torturing her, but it's okay. She got introduced to some new ideas. I put her on a horse for the first time, that kind of stuff. And I am proud to say that when she did eventually move back to Chicago, she now has good stories to tell, and like tells people how excited she is to go see the cows or horses. Anyway, I find that very, very interesting. I wish they had more opportunities where she grew up to interact with farms.
Yeah, I think we were talking about how we would really be for the idea of designing, like, instead of the nature overpasses, do like farmer overpasses. So that way they could like farm in little strips above the interstate, or like pass their tractors safely over the interstate, or move their cows safely over the interstate without having to, like, you know, cross the literal interstate. But
that would be nice.
Is there any sort of weird designs or weird things you've come across in farming that made you question why?
Well, you're always going to find a couple of things that make you think that. One of the things that just comes right off the top of my head is a lot of the barns I am in day in and day out right the minute are older. They were built before we had the automatic milking claws, right? That kind of milk the cow for you. These barns were built when you milked all your cows by hand. And so one of the improvements that came with the automatic milkers, right, is you have to get the milk from the cow, from the milker, into your bulk tank that holds all the milk so the milk truck can come get it. And those have to kind of head downhill. So they can get a little bit low because the ceiling doesn't start out high enough in a lot of these barns. And if you're not careful, you'll walk right into them. And I have spent several days with a headache all day because I ran face first into a pipe that was a little lower than expected. So I kind of wonder why we can't find a better way to do that sometimes, but it's okay. Gotta do what you gotta do.
A lot of times, designs.
Right. But the guy that built the barn didn't foresee him needing to build the ceiling any higher, right? Along those same lines, I often wonder about the placement of the milk house in some of these barns. And I guess I should tell you, do you know what a milk house is, Hollywood?
I do, but for our listeners, you should probably drop a line just in case they don't know what it is.
Okay, well, a milk house is a room that houses the bulk tank where all the milk is stored and kept cool. It's a very clean room that's where you keep the milk equipment, and generally has a sink. But that room is inspected by the milk inspector and kept very clean. But it has to be placed in such a spot that the milk truck can essentially back up to the door, so they can get their hose in to get the milk out of the bulk tank. And so sometimes those milk houses are placed in a very good spot, and sometimes they're just kind of in a corner out of the way because it's the only place they could put it where the milk truck could get in to some of the older farms.
Oh, and you had a really cool barn you were telling me about yesterday about like changing, he like switched the way the cows were.
I did. I remember telling you about that. Well, so this is a guy that had to make his barn work for him. And so his barn was very atypical. This gentleman was in a wheelchair. And I don't know if he had always been in a wheelchair or if there was some kind of accident. I don't recall. But he actually had a traditional tie stall barn that had an upstairs to it, and he had an elevator put in his barn and made an apartment for himself upstairs. But downstairs is where the cows were, and instead of having a traditional tie stall barn where the cows face outward, and then behind them, and then between the two rows of cows, it would be an alleyway normally where you would milk from behind their rear legs or from the side. But instead of that, he had his cows facing inwards. So the feed alley was in the center of the barn, and had his barn special fitted with tracks and a feed cart that sat in those tracks. And the tracks went from his silo on the other side of the barn and went all the way down the feed alley. And then, so he just had to push the cart in a straight line and then could push it straight back to the silo to reload. Or instead of having to push it like all the way around the barn, that wouldn't have worked too well. And I thought that was very interesting. He I'm sure had plenty of help making that happen, but he had to make the farm work for him, right?
No, that's definitely a good innovation. Like thinking through the shortest distance between any 2 points is a straight line, and this definitely proves it by that. And that's really cool that he adapted the technology to him. And I guess that really kind of brings me to my next thing. We talked kind of about it. You were talking about like the gates, reading the ear tags and stuff. And I was reading up on smart technology after we tried to record yesterday, and like smart farming, which of course leads you to like vertical farming and like green walls and things. And I myself am guilty of putting a green wall in several of my design projects for classes. But what what technology have you noticed that has helped out with the farming life?
Oh my goodness, they use technology everywhere these days. So I guess everybody listening didn't get to hear my tale about the sort gates yesterday, so I'll retell it briefly. And a lot of these barns, when the cows leave the milking parlor, they go through a return alley to go back to the pen that they normally live in. And most of these cows wear an ID tag on their ear or on their collar that a special reader can read. But I can tell the computer to say, okay, cow 409 needs to be sorted. Now, maybe I need to sort her to dry her off. Maybe I need to give her medicine or have her bred or do something. Or pets. I guess we can give her pets. But the gate will close and open another gate to put her in a special pen so that I can find her easily later, to either move her or do whatever I need to do. And that's very helpful. It saves on labor. It saves on stress for the cows. I don't have to go sort through a pen of 100 cows just to find one to chase her up or something. I mentioned the collars that they wear. A lot of those collars and even the ID tags can monitor the cow's activity. It can tell me, depending on what kind of tag and what kind of system it is, can tell me if she's walking more than normal, which could indicate that she is in heat and needs to be bred. They can tell me, there's several of these systems that are out now that will give a warning that she's moving less than she normally does. That could indicate that somebody needs to go lay eyes on her. She might be sick. She might be, she may have a hurt foot or something. So it alerts the farmer to go find that cow and make sure she's okay. There's a system out that just came out, oh gosh, maybe the first of the year. But it allows me to locate a cow within the barn. If I load like a schematic of my barn into the computer, it tells me down to what stall she is in, like what bed she's laying in.
Big Brother is watching and he likes your cows.
Oh yeah, and those systems are really fun when the cows get out, because you can see her dot just like leaving the barn, off it goes. Although everyone hopes that never happens, but it does. So,
I mean, I think I told the story yesterday about my mom, but nobody, like I said, we're kind of confusing ourselves with what we actually said yesterday versus what we said today, which is probably why you don't record multiple times. But
it's a learning experience, okay?
But my mom was a kid. She was going to school and throwing the usual, I think she must have been like 8 or something is what she said. So she was throwing like the usual little kid temper tantrum. She might have been older, I don't know, about like, I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go to school. And her mom, my grandma, was like, you got to go to school. And then my mom opened the door to go outside and goes, Mom, I can't go to school. There's a bull on the front yard, with like absolute glee because she can't go to school. And my grandmother's like, no, there's definitely not. And turns out that a farm that existed like a couple, like plots over, had a bull that got out and was apparently just eating the dandelions on my grandparents' yard, having a grand old time with life, which I guess kind of brought me, like, my family loves animals. We're not going to go like pet a strange one that we don't have permission to pet. But it kind of made me wonder, like, with animals and with the like distance to city life and the suburbs and the suburban areas, wouldn't it be amazing if we had like mini farms designed in such a way like they're like put into the city, kind of the reverse of the standard version of the current city? So instead of being like centered around your like place of, you know, business, your like leadership, etc., it'd be like positioned around your farm, like a complete inverse of ideals. But while I'm like preaching anarchy here, the thing that I was talking about yesterday also was this idea of people like escaping to the city, like from the city life to the country life. And we kind of spoke about this yesterday, and I accidentally said it was one person who I'm not going to say the same name, but I was actually thinking of Hadrian's village or villa. Sorry, not village. I mean, he was an emperor, so he owned a village. But Hadrian's villa is what I was thinking of, which is like one of like the surviving quintessential, you know, remains of an escapism from city life into the simpler times where you're kind of like playing house, like Maria Antoinette did, reportedly, like her little house or playhouse where she like farmed, quote unquote, because I keep forgetting this is not a physical, you can't see me. So what is that kind of like look like, I guess? Would there be a way to blend it in through design, that you could blend these ideas better? Or is there a solution to that? Or is it kind of a play by ear, see what happens?
Well, I think there's a couple different ways we can kind of look at this. As far as making the farm the center of like the city or the community, maybe if you had more of a small farm, like a petting zoo or something that didn't require a lot of land, maybe, but that would be the limiting factor, is who can afford to buy land in the middle of the city to farm on? It's expensive. But I think it would be good for people to get that kind of experience in their daily lives again. Hopefully we could cut down on the number of kids who think their milk comes from the grocery store. Or
pet peeve number one.
Do what?
Rachel's pet peeve number one.
Rachel's pet peeve number one, that's right. Red cows do not make strawberry milk. Let's just get that fixed right now. Okay? Black cows do not make chocolate milk. No, your mom probably told you that, but she was lying. Not to call your mom a liar. But you were talking about maybe people visiting farms, or like, that's almost what I would call like ag tourism or farm tourism almost. And you do see some of that. People go to dude ranches to see how a ranch runs, or get a chance to ride a horse or what have you. You see the same thing in some communities that have lots of small farms. You'll see they'll give tours of the farms. So people can, from the outside, can come in and see how some of these farmers live day to day and how they raise their animals. And I think that's very valuable, right? Because I think it's very important that people see that we don't mistreat our animals. And there's a reason for our buildings, right? There's a reason I have 5 silos outside, because I need them. And a lot of these farm stays. I know several people that have like a B&B, and part of the B&B stay is to help feed the calves or get to help milk a cow, you know, however often you want while you stay there. I think it's a unique way to show off the farm. I know several people that they run their farm not necessarily as a dairy, but they run it to have daily tours through, and they show people how to care for different animals. I'm trying to think. The farm in particular I'm thinking of has turkeys and chickens, ducks, mini pigs, mini goats. I think they probably have full-size versions of both of those. Cows and ponies and horses and dogs. They have everything you could ever dream of on a farm. So it's a lot of stuff that people don't get to see all at one time very often. Did I go off on a tangent?
No, you didn't go off on a tangent. Or if you did, I liked it, so it's fine. But I was gonna say goat yoga, man. Like that's what we need to market.
They do that here. I know people that do that.
See, okay, so if we were gonna design a farm, if you and I were gonna sit down and like, okay, this is the points that we think is important to list in a design, would you say that we need more than one silo?
Yes.
One barn for the animals, whatever they are, whether it's our yoga goats or our multiple cows. Would you say that you would need an extra, like maybe not a full barn, but an extra like tool shed workshop separate from the barn?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then the house, and that would be, you think, the bare minimum? If it was like you, me, and like one other person.
Yeah, at the very least, you need a house to live in, a tool shed to keep all your tools, maybe an equipment shed, depending on if you have any large equipment, and then a spot for your animals. So that's a minimum of 3 or 4 buildings at least. And well, I guess you need feed storage, but we talked about silos. And to be clear, there are several different kinds of ways to do that. They have bunk silos now that instead of being like the tall, skinny ones, they're actually kind of like a hole dug in the ground, almost, like a big box that they cover with plastic so that it ferments. Or people even use ag bags, which is like a long, skinny tube that they pack with whatever it is that they're storing. But
okay, and if you had to give advice to a design student, like their freshman year, they're first learning about design tactics, and they're doing multiple mini projects, what would be some of the priorities or some of the like rituals of the farmer that they would need to keep in mind? And for our non-designer, just to quickly explain what I mean by rituals, I am not encouraging cults or anything like that. Please don't
join the farm cult. Continue.
But what I'm saying is in architecture school, or at least in my school, we are pretty interested in, or several professors are really interested in how a person utilizes the space like in their day-to-day life, like whether it's like they always get up and brush their teeth and go here afterwards, and like, or like me, they like get up, brush their teeth, do some yoga, do some workouts, etc. And for us, like it kind of, if we frame it within like the ritual of the space, like this is the intention of the space, this is how we use it, this is the way we use it, this is kind of the progression, that's like an interesting sidetrack for us. So if you were to label like what's the interest or the ritual of the farmer that any design student would need to consider when they're like first approaching this?
Oh gosh, first approaching it?
Yeah, like they know nothing.
The very first thing you should stop and go and ask yourself is, what does the land look like? Right? You don't want to put your house or your barn or wherever somewhere it's going to flood when it rains. Right? You don't want all the water on everything to drain right into your farm. You don't want if you build up north where it snows a lot, in the wintertime, you need someplace to put all the snow to get your driveways clear, right? So you've got to remember to leave some room for that. And I could be going in a completely wrong direction, but I think these are important things to abide by as farmers as far as runoff. And there are laws that apply to the manure storage and stuff. And so you need to be up to date on those before you place anything anywhere permanent. But then you moving to like the farmer's rituals on a lot of these smaller family farms, and even the big ones. The farmer doesn't live far from his cows. Especially in the dairies, where they have to have somebody milk them and take care of them every day. But the farmer walks not very, maybe 100. I'm not very good at distances, but it's not far. In the middle of winter, I could make it from the house to the barn without a coat. Does that make sense? Kind of. So he needs to be close, but you have to think about what he needs. And I should probably quit saying he. Not all farmers are men before I get myself into trouble. But what does that farmer need? He might need a little office, a small nook somewhere to keep his records on breedings or treatments, a medicine room with labeled shelves and possibly a refrigerator, and places to store any kind of equipment he may need for applying drugs, needles, syringes, an ear tag.
So it sounds like a pretty long list of different ideas that are pretty basic to it. Like there's more to the design clearly that you're kind of, so like there's a lot more to the design, it sounds like, that we need to consider as designers beyond just how they move through the space.
Right. And I think it would be a very big challenge for you to design something that was very functional without having A, experienced it, or B, get to sit down and talk to whoever's going to be using it.
Okay, so you're saying
a lot of these. Continue.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say, so you're saying that client relations is very important, and like getting to know who you're designing for.
Absolutely, because everybody has their preferences. I'm not, and all the barns I go to, no two are the same. Sometimes the guy's medicine room and his office are the same thing. Sometimes they're completely different. Sometimes there's neither one of them at all because he keeps all his drugs in the house or something. I don't know. Maybe they're in the cabinet I haven't found yet. I don't know. But it just depends on what he needs it for. Maybe some of the farmers I know also have a horse barn attached to the cow barn. So that changes things drastically as far as layout. So it'd be very challenging, but I think that building a farm ends up being a lot like a lot of people that build their own houses. Somebody that builds their house new. If you go back and ask them, 10 years down the road, is this a perfect house? Is there anything you would change about it? What are most people gonna say? I would think most of them are gonna find one or two things they would do differently. So, I don't know. That's my take on it anyway.
Hindsight is 20/20.
That's right.
So I guess this will kind of be our last question. Have you noticed any distinction between self-directed /design farms and a quote designer farm?
differences, like differences in layout or?
Yes, sorry, that did sound very like I was trying to trap you in a question. I meant more like, have you noticed with the self-designed farms versus like a designer, like somebody outside of there in a firm designing a farm, have you noticed anything like regarding either the layout or the functionality? Like, is there a certain level of personalization that doing it yourself, designing it by yourself, allows you a certain freedom versus the designer farm? Or have you noticed anything like that? This is more of like a pro and a con list, not a like offer criticism and piss off your clients question.
Well, I think everything has its pros and cons, but as far as what I look at every day, you know, I can usually tell when someone's farm has been professionally designed. And a lot of times I can tell that by ease of access and ease of moving the cows, right? So somebody's really sat down and thought that out, where they need to put their gates and where the pens are. It can make a huge difference in how hard my life is getting from A to B or moving a cow from wherever.
Okay, so it sounds like that's not even a fair question that I asked. It's more of a, what was the intention when designing would be a better way to say it. So like, was this like the tradition? Like this is how they've traditionally done it for years versus somebody who focused on the needs of the space in the design?
I guess you could say that. The thing about designing it yourself is that you can see, you know, far enough in the future to be like, I'm gonna leave that spot right there because I think this is what we're gonna do when I get the money to do it, or, you know, get more cows to do it, and you just leave it alone. And or farmers are notorious for making things work. Okay, for example, my grandfather is notorious for our fixing fences. Sometimes we did not have all the tools available at the time, but the fence needed to be fixed or the cows would get out. And this is a little off track, but we knew ways to make it look like the fence was put together enough to fake the cows out for a little while. And so sometimes that's what you have to do, is you make it work for now with the intent of perfecting it maybe 10 years down the road. And I think a lot of times when you design it yourself, that's what you have in mind. Okay. Where sometimes if a firm or something was involved, it looks a little different, maybe a little more finished, even with expansion in mind later, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So, I mean, innovation is the mother of necessity. So
that's right.
Or is it reversed? I can't quite remember. But
necessity is the
the mother of innovation. You're right. I totally just like inverted that.
Well, I got the gist of it.
But is there anything that you were wanting, like, that we didn't get to cover that we covered in one of our multiple recordings that you felt that we needed to bring up today before we like close off? I'm giving you the opportunity to correct me
if I missed any cool stories, because I don't want to deprive anybody, but I think we hit all the high points. This might be a good opportunity for me to just go ahead and tell everybody that I'm no expert and I haven't been everywhere and seen every farm. And they are all very different.
Well, like I told everybody in my first episode, you know, check your sources, check your facts, and more importantly, check me. So if we said anything that you don't agree with, or anything that you have a unique insight on, please don't hesitate to reach out. Let me know. I really want to hear from you. I want to hear from the non-designers of the world. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining me today, Racheal. And a huge thank you to all of my listeners that I'm really surprised I actually have. If you want to either be featured or have a case study suggestion, or perhaps you just want to share a story of your favorite designer experience in the landscape. You can find me at either Architecture, Coffee, and Ink. The website is architectureink.design.blog. If you want to reach out to me directly, my Twitter is at Hollywood Conrad, which, like I said before, pretty much hasn't changed. Just now got 3 whole tweets. I'm very proud of it now. Everything will be listed as normal in the show notes, including my incredibly long URL. There is currently a contact form on the finished homepage of the website, so you can also just email me directly. Just make sure that's architecturecoffeeandink@gmail.com, all spelled out without the ampersands. So and is literally just A-N-D, no spaces. My theme song is once again by me in GarageBand. So thank you once again for getting through it. I'm still open to submissions. And the other music in this episode is also going to be from me in GarageBand because I got cocky and thought that I could keep going. I got really excited when I was playing around with it. And as always, everything is credited along with the sources on the blog, although since this is a interview episode instead of a normal case studies episode, there's really not going to be that many sources today. But as always, please support your local artist and try something new. And as always, may your coffee mugs be full and your ink wells never run dry. Thank you. Have a great day.